Whitney. I'm delighted to be here to open our program and to introduce Joseph Aoun more formally. In its 55th year of publishing some of the world's most prominent authors in fields ranging from science and technology to art and architecture, and importantly for this evening, including fields like higher education and linguistics, the MIT Press is committed to nothing less than reimagining what a university press can and should be. This spirit is alive and well in tonight's featured speaker, Joseph Aoun, and his just published book, Robot Proof: Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. In his book, Aoun challenges traditional models of the university and of literacy itself in an age in which tasks based on rote learning and memory are increasingly the purview of machines. His book makes us rethink the purpose of higher education in confronting the world's problems. A robot-proof education trains creators, not laborers, he writes. Now, as someone who reads a lot of books and reads a lot of book proposals, some of it very dry academic stuff, let me say that I was impressed not only with the content and accessibility of this book, but with its many beautifully crafted sentences. I mentioned to a mutual friend, Jay Kaiser, professor emeritus of linguistics at MIT and editor of a well-known journal in the field named Linguistic Inquiry, that I had the honor of introducing Joseph tonight. And Jay replied, quote, "I could never understand how he could bring himself to choose the presidency of Northeastern over being associate editor of Linguistic Inquiry. There is no accounting for taste. He was also my student. Perhaps that's where he went wrong." So for those of you who know him, that's quintessential Jay. Joseph Aoun earned his PhD in linguistics at MIT in 1982, serving as Professor Noam Chomsky's first teaching assistant during his years here. He is a native of Lebanon, and he studied in Beirut and Paris before coming to MIT. And after MIT, he joined the faculty of USC's College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, where he was named the inaugural holder of the Anna H. Bing Dean's Chair. Northeastern University named Aoun its 7th president in 2006. Now in his 12th year in the role, he has distinguished himself as an expert on global and experiential education. He's enhanced Northeastern's signature co-op program with work opportunities around the world, and he shares many of these successes, the successes of the co-op program in the book. To date, Northeastern students have worked, studied, and conducted research in 131 countries on all 7 continents. In 2011, Aoun received the Robert A. Mew Award from MIT, which honors MIT graduates for significant achievements in humanities, arts, and social science fields. And announced just today, Aoun is one of 7 university presidents honored by the Carnegie Corporation with a leadership award of $500,000 to advance his educational initiatives, which is quite remarkable and typical of his commitment. He pledged a matching grant to take this award even further. After President Aoun opens with his own remarks on his book, David Rotman will take the helm and start a conversation to steer us through some of the work's key questions. And then we hope members of the audience will join in the discussion as well. David is editor of MIT Technology Review, a science and business journalist. He has written extensively on chemistry, biotechnology, material science, AI, and environmental issues. But first, please join me in welcoming President Joseph Aoun of Northeastern University.
Thank you. Good evening. It's good to be back at my alma mater and to see some friends and colleagues and some of my teachers. Actually, Sylvan is here, and Amy and I graduated from the linguistics program. So her, she is very biased in her introduction. Don't believe anything she said. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book. Essentially, something you all know, smart machines are getting smarter and are displacing us on many levels. Many jobs are becoming obsolete. As a matter of fact, various studies have shown, indicated, projected that over the next 20 years, close to 50% of the jobs we know will disappear. The inequality we know today is going to increase even further. At the same time, when we look at the marketplace, when we look at society and we ask ourselves, and we ask people, CEOs, employers, institutions, what kind of talent are you looking for? They are looking for the creative talent, the entrepreneurial talent, the talent that can work with people, that can be culturally agile, that can be global, that can think in a systematic way. And this is something that is needed, and this is something that everybody wants to have. Given the challenges of jobs being redefined and what people and what society is asking for, higher education must change in order to make people robot-proof. So in my book, what I am presenting is a blueprint for how higher education can change to make people robot-proof. So I'm saying three things. One, we need to rethink our curriculum. Second, we need to integrate experiential learning as part of what we do. And third, we need to move lifelong learning in order for it to become part of our core mission. So let me start by the curriculum. I am calling for a curriculum based on humanics. What is humanics? Humanics is the mastery of three literacies. The tech literacy, understanding machines, understanding how they work, and understanding how to interact with these machines. The second is data literacy, namely the understanding of the enormous amount of information that machines are producing and how we can navigate this information, make sense of it, and be on top of it. And the third is what I call the human literacy, namely the focus on cultivating what is unique to human beings, that machines will have difficulty duplicating. What are these attributes? Creativity, entrepreneurship, systems thinking, the ability to interact with people, to be empathetic, the ability to be culturally agile, the ability to be global, and the ability to function in teams. How do we achieve that? We don't teach creativity. We don't teach entrepreneurship. We have to practice it. We have to live it. And that's the second component, experiential education. Experiential education is essentially the integration of the classroom experience with the world experience. Now, I believe that the most powerful form of experiential education is based on the work practice or long-term internships or co-ops, as Amy said. What are these? Are long-term internships that allow the learners to test what she has learned in the classroom, to refine it, to understand what she's good at, to understand how to work with other people, to understand her limitations and her potential, and then to be a leader, to be a creator, and then to integrate the two together. That's the power of experiential education, and I see it happening on a daily basis. The third aspect is lifelong learning. Machines are smart and also getting smarter. More jobs are going to disappear, and also new jobs are going to be created. We are going to be obsolete, each one of us, unless we re-educate ourselves unless we retool. Lifelong learning is a necessity. Now, lifelong learning in higher education has always been viewed as a second-class operation, ancillary to what we do. It has to move to the fore. It has to become part of our core mission. People need to re-educate themselves, to retool, in order to remain robot-proof. But it's not going to be easy to integrate lifelong learning as part of our core mission, because it will lead us to rethink our curricula, who owns them, are we the sole owners of these curricula, are the learners, the employers, society, do they have a role to play in shaping them? It's going to lead us to rethink the notion of delivery. It's going to also lead us to rethink how we are going to bring the learners to us. They don't have the time, they don't have the ability, we have to go to them. The university has to go to learners. It's going to lead us also to rethink our notions of degrees, credentialing. We need to meet these challenges. Society is changing, the world is changing, higher education needs to change, and I believe that higher education has the responsibility and the opportunity to make every learner robot-proof. That's what my book is all about. Thank you. With this one? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
My name is David Rotman. I'm the editor of Technology Review. It's a great pleasure, great honor to be able to participate in this conversation with you. I have to say, this book is terrific.
Thank you.
And if people haven't read it, they should. And I think it does many things well, but two of them is it provides a historical context and a current context of why AI and robots are changing jobs, and how technologies in the past have changed jobs, and how this time it's different in many ways. And it's a very nicely, I think, discussion of what is happening. And then secondly, as we just heard, it not just offers a problem, but it provides a really, I think, strong argument for why education needs to help people adapt to these changes. So, terrific book.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a few questions and then really open it up and hopefully have a discussion. I wanted to start by asking you, when did you start thinking about AI and robots and their effect on work and how why education might change? And then as sort of a follow-up, as you began writing the book, as you wrote the book, how did your thinking change?
You know that there is a seminal work that has been done by two faculty here at the Sloan School called The Second Machine Age. And this work was a call into action because they raised the implications of what AI is going to do to society, to work. So that, if you want, that's one of the first books that I read. Obviously, I've been reading a lot of books on AI, trying to learn about it. But that was one of the turning points for me. And, and then if in higher education, we don't like to think too much about work. We want to educate our students, but we don't care whether there is any implication for work or not. And, I belong to an institution now at Northeastern where this has been part of the core mission of the institution is to think about the work not of today only, but the work of the future. So, this led me to start thinking about the implications of the AI revolution, the second machine age on work, on society, and frankly on higher education. What has changed over when I was writing a book is the book is that the acceleration happened. Namely, when people started talking about AI, people thought that this was remote, this was not going to happen, and suddenly, we are seeing it around us. Jobs disappearing, jobs being redefined. And at the same time, we are seeing also that many politicians are denying that. We have politicians here, saying this is not a problem that we should be concerned with. And, so therefore, other people are scared. We need to regulate that. We need to tax it. We need to do X, Y, and Z. So what has happened is that something that started being a kind of almost academic discussion became central to many discussions happening in society. And that's why I had to adapt and, and integrate elements that I didn't think about before.
Yes, I think both the pace of the development of the technology has been much faster than I think many had anticipated. And I think it's become more evident that we're unprepared for these changes, policymakers and society as large.
Absolutely. And I was mentioning to David that if you look across different countries, Europe is much more sensitive to that and much more worried about that. And it's happening at the government level. Whereas here, the government is saying, look, this is not an issue we need to be concerned with. So it's interesting. And there are, for instance, England is now, the UK is looking at possibilities of asking each company to put a small fraction of its margin in order to focus on educating and re-educating their workers, their executives, and their future employees.
Right. You touched on this a bit, but I was struck at one point in your book. You said you called it one of the most powerful skills that we have as people versus machines or versus robots is creativity. And creativity is still that advantage that a person has over and will maybe always have. I was wondering if maybe you could expand on, I think you mean creativity in a very general sense, in a very broad sense, and maybe expand on what gives people that advantage over machines, over robots.
Here at MIT, the creativity is everywhere. But so in society, let's go beyond higher education. An entrepreneur is a creator. An entrepreneur is looking at a problem and looking at an opportunity and seeing it in a different way. Similarly, somebody who is launching a not-for-profit in, either in Roxbury or in Africa is a creator and is shaping something new. People who are working in various industries are rethinking this industry. So it's not only the research, the fundamental research that is by definition, creative. It's everything we do, the way we look at the world, the way we look at the problem, the way we rethink an issue is based on creativity. And, this is something that has been the purview of human beings, the human species. And it's very difficult I haven't seen yet a robot that is going to see the next new opportunity, to create, Apple, or have a new theory, whatever it is. So that's why I think, we have to focus on these aspects that are specific to human beings.
and recognize that as AI and robots, there's many things that will get more and more powerful. But I certainly believe, as you just outlined, that the creativity is something that will be elusive, at least for the foreseeable future for AI.
Yeah, and hopefully other aspects too. The ability to look you in the eye and understand, whether you're happy with what I'm saying or unhappy. The ability to read your body language, the ability to interact with you, to empathize with you when you're happy or when you are sad. The ability to work with you and be led by you, all these aspects are fundamental to who we are as human beings. And this is something that we need to continue to cultivate and focus on.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to ask, you touched about it a bit in the book, is that we hear a lot these days about skill gaps in terms of there's not enough people to hire for jobs. And then I know, as you point out in the book, many economists do not believe that it's true. And it's a complex issue. But I wanted to ask you your take on the skill gap, how we address it, how we make sure people are sort of prepared, and how companies perhaps work with universities to make sure that we're training people for the right skills, the right jobs.
For instance, now if you survey what is needed in society now, and actually those surveys happen, the Business Higher Education Forum did that, the Chamber of Commerce did that, Council of Competitiveness did that. You see that, for instance, they are saying that we need cybersecurity and big data. This is not a surprise. And that there is an enormous demand for cyber, big data, etc. Now, clearly, others you can add design thinking, you can add various other aspects. But, you asked me how society and how we can look into that. There are two types of learners that I am discussing in my book. Those that I call short on experience, long on time. And those are the undergraduates that you teach. And the others are the learners who are long on experience but short on time. And those are us, the adults. So, there will be new demands constantly for new jobs, etc. What has happened, for instance, is that, and that's lifelong learning, namely for the second group, long on experience, short on time. What has happened is that society has answered, because in fact higher education has not answered that. We haven't answered that by creating for-profits, by creating boot camps, but in order to meet the needs. The number of boot camps that were started that will teach you coding, now they are teaching you big data, they are teaching you cyber, they are teaching you, they are doing it. But we are seeing the limitations of what they have done. Because if you have a boot camp, let's say in coding, the employers are saying this will get you into the job, but it will not allow you to really think and master and be a creator. It's rote learning. So this is, in some ways, companies have answered that by saying, we are going to create our own universities. That's interesting. And every time a company starts its own university, that means what? That means that we didn't meet their needs. Otherwise, why should they start their own university? At MIT, I have MIT T-shirts, and I have also Northeastern T-shirts. So when I design at Northeastern T-shirts, I don't manufacture them. I go to somebody who knows how to do it because that's their core business. So every time a company like IBM or GE start a university, that's a failure of higher education. So to answer your question, society has done that by allowing the for-profits to flourish. Society has answered the need by allowing, or they don't need to be allowed to do it, by companies are doing lifelong learning. Now, if we don't do it, and we do it based on precisely getting people to be robot-proof, that's our failure. And that's also our opportunity.
Right. I want to begin taking some questions from the audience. I'm sure there are many. Yes. Is there why don't you is there a microphone that will come around? There you go.
Like many people in this room, I was taught by Paul Samuelson that perhaps a central issue in economics is scarcity. Say's law says that everything that is produced will be consumed, and there is no concept of excess productive capability. I believe that AI and advances in materials science and biotechnology have, or will soon, repeal these laws. How do we create an economic system that widely distributes purchasing power so that consumer choice determines what is produced, and yet we want to maintain incentives for outstanding people to be creative and work hard?
Thank you. This is a great question, and it's beyond me in many ways, because you are referring to the fact that if indeed AI and robots are going to displace us as people who have jobs, who are going to be the consumers, who are going to be the taxpayers, and also there will be great winners and many losers, by very bifurcated society. So what is happening is that there are discussions about, universal basic income. You know about that. You have discussions saying, no, we have to give incentives for people to redefine themselves. This is not something that I discuss. It's really beyond my expertise. What I'm saying that everybody will become obsolete unless she or he re-educate themselves and retools, and higher education has to step in and integrate lifelong learning as part of its core mission.
And I might just suggest, I wouldn't even begin to offer an answer to your question, but I think it does point out that these are major, significant upheavals to the economy, to our society, how we think about our future, how we think about the role of work in our economy. So I'm not sure anyone really has an answer, but I think it does point to that this is a big deal going on.
Absolutely.
Here you go.
Northeastern is known for its experiential education. And Northeastern has also made some big strides with online education. How do you provide an experiential learning experience, and how do you manage that when your students may not be anywhere near the campus?
Yeah, I didn't ask him to ask this question. So thank you, first of all. In everything we do, we are experiential. Whether we're doing undergraduate education, whether we're doing all the certificates, masters, etc. And now we are moving in having all our PhDs being experiential. Some of my colleagues are here who are leading this effort. The one thing that we have done is to go where the learner is. What does it mean? For people who are long on experience, short on time, namely the adults, we have launched a certain number of campuses. They're in Silicon Valley, in Seattle, in Charlotte, in Toronto, and soon in Europe and Asia. The purpose, precisely, is to be where the learner is and to provide experiential education. So, for somebody who is long on experience, we take into account what she knows, what she does in the workplace. I'm talking here about the professionals. It's not, we go for groups of 20. It's really not the mass market approach or anything like that. And then for those who are trying to re-educate themselves and move into new fields, everything we do, from the certificate to the degree, has to be experiential. And it has to be integrated, because the point is not to have the experience and to have the classroom experience. The point is the integration of the two as a learning approach. So, which means that, in fact, the university is becoming a multi-university. You know, Boston is only one manifestation of Northeastern. That's what we have done. So whatever we do, wherever we do it, we go to the learner and we do it in an experiential way.
Let me go ahead, but as you get ready, let me intervene. There's a question that people have posted, and it is as follows. Are you concerned that even following your blueprint for higher education, there will be far fewer jobs available than people who need employment? I think it's...
You know, this is a healthy concern. There will be jobs that will disappear. There'll be new jobs that will be created. I cannot predict, whether the jobs that will be created will be enough. We need to be ready to be, to educate ourselves, to look at these new opportunities. Are they going to be enough? I don't know. I hope so. But certainly, I know one thing, that if we ignore the fact that we need to re-educate ourselves and be part of them, we are going to be losers.
Right. I've actually asked some version of this question to many people. And the best answer I get is there is really no way to know how many. The key part of this equation is how many jobs will be created with the new technology. And this is basically unknowable. And I think, to your point, what we can do is prepare ourselves for the type of work that's needed, the types of jobs, and hope those jobs flourish and multiply.
And also, along the same lines, if we start thinking about our learners as creators, there may be opportunities that they can shape themselves in different ways, and not only partake in a new economy, but create and shape this new economy.
Sir?
Two questions, briefly. American higher education, I think, generally is viewed as leading the world. American pre-college education is middle of the pack and maybe below middle of the pack. What has to happen in the public school system and in private secondary education to prepare people for the world that they're about to enter? And secondly, do you see any risk over time of what I would call a 21st century Luddite movement, saying, I don't want to be operated on by a robot. I don't want my car to be driven by a non-human. People saying, no, stop the world. I want to slow down. I like the things the way they are. And could that become significant over time?
Absolutely. You are seeing, to answer the second question, you are seeing reaction to that. And the reaction is, for instance, take even Uber, where, in Europe and in the rest of the world, there are very strong movements to oppose and limit that. Every time, I'm not saying something that is going to surprise you or profound. Every time there is a change, you have the early adopters, you have people who are not going to accept that, the Luddites, and the large majority is in a wait-and-see situation. And usually what happens is that the early adopters become the models. And they will carry the rest of the day. And it may take time, but ultimately you cannot stop it. So absolutely, it's happening as we speak. Similarly, the idea of, taxing robots, can be viewed along similar lines. Other protectionist measures that you know about worldwide can be viewed along the, similar lines. With respect to your first question about the discrepancy that we have in the United States between K through 12 and higher education is a fundamental question. I think that in some ways I'm going to say something that may surprise you. Higher education needs to start looking at itself as providing education or educational frameworks from K to gray. So for instance, we have launched at Northeastern this year a workshop in the summer where we invited 70 school counselors, advisors, principals to come from the United States and Canada to come and work with us on getting trained and retrained in experiential education. So why? Because we assume that our responsibility is also with respect to the K through 12. And the K through, I mentioned that higher education needs to change, and in order to allow learners to be robot-proof, it starts as an early child. And that's our responsibility also in higher education because we are leading the pack in terms of thinking about learning. And not only in terms of science and engineering and humanities, etc. Who does learning? Us. Are they benefiting from that? Not really.
I hold a mic. I'm sorry. Therefore, the power. You mentioned the critical characteristics that the students have to have, the entrepreneurship, creativity, ability to interact with people. At the same time, and I couldn't agree with you more about that, absolutely. At the same time, those tend to be fairly soft skills, and society seems to be moving more towards, keyword and pattern recognition on resumes and all that, right? So the interesting question is, number one, how do you assess both within the school, and then how do you propose to, let's say, society or the private sector to evaluate and assess those skills? Because that's getting harder and harder without interviewing everybody in the world.
Yeah, it's a great point because in many ways, in whatever we do in higher education, we have focused on input measures. We know how to assess input very well. Namely, when you look at the incoming students, we know who they are, we know the grades they have, what they have done, etc. We don't assess the outcome. We don't know how to assess the outcome well. And now that's something we need to work on. But going back to your point about what you call the soft skills, I'm not asking only to focus on what you call the soft skills. I'm calling for the integration of the tech literacy, information literacy with the human literacy. In other words, every engineer has to understand the implications, to be very simplistic, the implication of what she is doing when they are working on building a new city along the coastal lines. The environmental implications, the human implications, etc. Now, the final point that you raised, how do we assess that? We are at Northeastern, we have created a platform, an app, that will take each learner before they start at Northeastern, and then will remain with him or her for the rest of her life. If you want, call it coaching for life. That will allow them to assess their objectives, learning and otherwise, and how they are meeting their objectives and how we are helping them meet their objectives. We launched it this fall with 1,000 students, and next year is going to be universal. So we have to do it. We have to start. And, you know, will we have the perfect app and the perfect coaching app in, you know, in the first year? Absolutely not. We are learning and we are building it as we are flying it. Sorry.
So before I came to MIT, I went to a liberal arts school where it was sort of drilled into us that the purpose of higher education is not to train you for a job, but it is a place where you learn how to learn. And given these developments, I feel that this approach is being vindicated. However, over the last 20 years, I have also noticed that the universities around the world have started reducing or even eliminating their departments of philosophy, of history, of literature. Are they doing a disservice to their students, given what the future bears?
I think, let me tell you, each one of us in higher education bears a responsibility, because we created a false dichotomy between learning to live and learning to earn a living. Let me repeat that. We have created a false dichotomy between learning to live and learning to earn a living. And we got away with that because we are an affluent society. Nowadays, this is being questioned. So what I'm asking for, what I'm calling for, is not this dichotomy, is to go beyond it and to integrate the various literacies, from the technological to the human literacies. And that is what I'm calling for. So the second aspect of your point is that, are we doing ourselves a disservice to close a classics department or not? In my mind, as an educator, the responsibility is dual. We are doing ourselves a disservice, and I agree with you, but also when we start focusing on, we are not teaching literature, we're teaching theory. I'm not teaching history, I'm teaching my theoretical approach to history. That becomes something that is about me, not about the learner. So we moved away from the ideal that you are espousing. And that's why also you are seeing now several liberal arts colleges waking up and saying, no, we need to integrate an experiential approach in what we are doing. We need to worry about the real world. So you see, the world is changing, we have to change. And we have an enormous opportunity. And that's what I'm describing in this book.
Let's take one more question, and I have one question that has been sent in.
Karen is somebody I know, so I don't. She's biased too. So go ahead, Karen.
Looking forward to reading the book.
You haven't read it, Karen? Oh my God!
No one sent me a copy.
Okay, I'll give you a copy.
So primary and secondary education have been widely criticized for training teachers too much in how to teach. Higher ed has been criticized for teaching people content. PhDs learn about research and so forth, and not how to teach. Is Northeastern hiring different kinds of PhDs or training people? How do you get your professors to a spot where they know how to teach experientially instead of what they were trained to do, or are they being trained differently?
You know, what we have done at Northeastern, Karen, is to focus on learning sciences and to create a center that is building the learning sciences, but also in like whatever we do, this is not only a theoretical center, but also a translational center. So that every educator is educated in experiential learning, is helped, it's coached, and becomes part of the ecosystem along these lines. Absolutely.
And what does that mean? How do you train someone to do experience?
I'll invite you, Karen, to do that. But essentially, as I mentioned, the first aspect of experiential education is not to have two separate endeavors. Namely, I'm teaching my material in the classroom, and then they go and they have a 6-month co-op or internship or whatever. It's how you are going to integrate that. And that's what we focus on, the integration of the two. So we have our learning specialists working with our faculty colleagues, and at the same time the faculty colleagues become the ones who are leading it through their practice, through their fine-tuning of that. And I have to tell you, the students, the learners play a big role, because once they go spend 6 months in Shanghai or Nepal, and they come back and you talk about discuss what's happening in terms of the climate, let's say in Shanghai, they can question you as faculty, because they got out of their comfort zone, they lived it, they worked in it, they shaped it, and they come back, they question you, and then they get you out of the comfort zone. So it means that in this approach, the learner is really at the center, because the learner is leading the whole process. So for me, when I came to Northeastern, this was an uneasy situation, because I had to learn. And my best teachers were the students, because they lived it. But I saw the transformational impact, because they came back knowing exactly what they don't want to do, what they want to do, and how they want to do it, which is, and they got me to understand this. So we have, this ecosystem is going to be helping you at multiple levels, through the students, the centers, the colleagues. And every faculty is doing that, goes through this immersion, if you want, that is transformative for us as faculty.
I'd like to sort of perhaps leave on, there's a question that was sent in, and the question is, knowing MIT as you do, what is your specific advice for the Institute vis-a-vis the conclusions in your book, and how best to rally the Institute resources in that direction?
I have to be careful. Raphael is a friend, so let me mention something. And it's going to be semi-controversial, not fully. edX is a peripheral operation at many levels. If you believe that lifelong learning has to become part of the core mission, your opportunity is to see how you can lead the world by integrating edX and MIT. edX is not MIT, and that's the opportunity. Lifelong learning, if you agree that lifelong learning has to become core and has to be fundamental to what you do, then there is a way of rethinking edX and rethinking the whole operation. How? I will let my colleagues here do it. That's a tough question.
And I think a good one to leave the audience with. So please join me in thanking President Joseph Aoun.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It was a terrific talk.
Thank you, David. Thank you for all for being here.
And also I wanted to thank to the MIT Press and to the MIT Alumni Association for putting all this together, for arranging it, making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. David.
Here's a look at some authors recently featured on Book TV's Afterwards, our weekly author interview program. Progressive Policy Institute Senior Fellow David Osborne examined the charter school movement and offered his outlook for the future of public education. Harvard University professor Danielle Allen discussed how mass incarceration has impacted her family. And radio host Mark Levin warned against federal government expansion. In the coming weeks on Afterwards, investigative journalist Art Levine will report on the mental health industry. Former radio host and MSNBC contributor Charles Sykes will offer his thoughts on the conservative movement in America. Craig Shirley will discuss the life and political career of Newt Gingrich. And this weekend, on Afterwards, New York Times Magazine contributor Susie Hansen reflects on her travels abroad and weighs in on America's global standing.
There's definitely that question of, are we exceptional? But there's also just the very question of, why had I never thought that this was a form of propaganda? That, why had I not sought to question where was this concept coming from? And what was the job that it was doing for individual Americans? And I think that, one thing that I was realizing, that this took a long time to realize, in fact, is that the very language that we used when we talked about foreign countries had been kind of determined for us a very long time ago, because we tended to look at foreign countries, especially Muslim countries and especially countries in the East, as were they catching up with us or were they behind us? And what that does is that prevents you from being able to see the country on its own terms.
Afterwards airs on Book TV every Saturday at 10 p.m. and Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can watch all previous Afterwards programs on our website, booktv.org.
Let me talk about the just a couple of examples. I mentioned bad materials, and one of the prime examples is cell lines that scientists use very commonly in laboratories. These are cells that grow in plastic dishes and grow perpetually. And the very first of those was actually featured in the story of Henrietta Lacks, which is a wonderful book, and now also a TV movie that's just out. And she was a woman who was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and at Johns Hopkins in 1951 they isolated some cervical cancer cells from her and turned it into the world's first set of immortal cells. This is a tremendously useful line of cells to be used in biomedical research. They're used still today. They're still in labs around the world. But this also turned out to be sort of the kudzu of cell lines, if you will, because these cells grow incredibly rapidly. And if you make a small error in your lab, before you know it, these they're called HeLa cells. Before you know it, they're spewed throughout all of your cells, and they just take over. And so scientists who think they're studying liver cancer, for example, in a liver cell, will ultimately, maybe, we hope, realize that they're actually studying these HeLa cells. And this has been a huge problem for decades. Scientists recognized this back in the early 70s, that these cells were taking over. And there was a lot of concern about it, a lot of hand-wringing, and honestly, not very much was done. Starting about 15 years ago, there were actually some pretty good tests that could rapidly identify whether these cells were in fact HeLa cells or the cell that a scientist thought they were using. But those tests did not really take off. They are not used as widely as they need to be. So this is just one example. There are 450 other examples of cell lines that are misidentified that are used all the time in biomedical research labs. And scientists have these tools to check them out, but they cost some money, they cost some inconvenience, and so these things don't end up getting used. These tests do not end up being used as much as they ought to be. So that's one source of problem, is these bad cell lines. A second thing I mentioned is bad methods that get picked up. Scientists sometimes they design experiments that don't really have enough power to tell them what's going on. And some of the classic examples involve mouse studies of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. These studies have led to a lot of drugs, and all of them have been failures in the search for some treatment for ALS. And one of the main problems, some of them are that scientists didn't think very thoroughly about what they needed to do, how many mice they needed to use. But also it's true that these experiments are quite expensive. And to do an experiment right, you might take dozens of mice for your study group and dozens more for your control group. That could easily cost over $100,000. And many academic scientists don't have that kind of money. So they say, well, I'll do 10 mice and I'll call my results a pilot study. But they're constrained by resources.